Okay, so I'll share my screen for everyone. Can everyone see that okay? Those who've still got the camera on, just give a thumbs up, or can everyone see the screen and hear me? Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So my name is Becky and I'm from BHA Wakefield, and today, as part of National Sexual Health Week, I thought I'd do a lunchtime session on HIV general knowledge and awareness. BHA Wakefield work in partnership with Spectrum, and we deliver HIV support and prevention in Wakefield, HIV support to anyone living with HIV and prevention to vulnerable communities. So in today's session, we'll be covering what is HIV and how it's transmitted, HIV facts and figures, HIV support, and then a little bit of myth busting about HIV in general. If you do have a question, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask. That's absolutely fine. Or you can type it in the chat. But there will be some time at the end to talk about, any questions. So, firstly, what is HIV? Standing for the human immunodeficiency virus. So HIV is a virus that affects the immune system. When you think about HIV, you might have thought of something along the lines of these pictures here, and that HIV maybe is just a virus, like the first picture might indicate. You might have thought about gay or bisexual men, or men who have sex with men. You might have thought about African communities, and you might have thought about AIDS as well. Well, HIV is obviously all of those things, but it is more than that. It doesn't discriminate. HIV can happen to all races, all cultures, and it's in all countries, and affects all sexualities and genders. Essentially, if you're human, you have the potential to contract HIV. It does, in the UK, disproportionately affect different communities. So we're going to explore a little bit more about that as we go along. So what is AIDS and how are they connected? For some people, you can't really talk about HIV without talking about AIDS. And in some communities, they are interchangeable words, but they are different. So AIDS stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. AIDS was coined as a term before they knew what HIV was. And it was used to describe the symptoms people were getting. If HIV is left untreated, it can destroy a person's immune system, so they get opportunistic infections, and then they can die from those infections. So nobody has ever actually died of HIV. They die because their immune system is so damaged that they get these infections, which the body just can't fight off. So again, commonly called AIDS. Now, officially, AIDS is not used anymore to describe these symptoms. But when I say officially, old habits do die hard. And although it might not be officially used, people still do use it, frequently. But we try and lessen the use of it in a modern context. And the main reason for that is just the stigma and the fear and the weight of that word. It can have a real impact on people thinking about AIDS and the sort of damage that can cause to somebody's mental health. But we will take it on sort of a person by person basis. I've met clients who have talked about AIDS and they will quite happily say, yeah, I was diagnosed with AIDS and a few years ago. And then I've met people who would, be horrified to be linked with that word. So, we do try and have a person-centered approach with it, but as a service, we tend to use it less in a modern context. But being aware that we don't want to erase the history of AIDS and HIV, from around the world, and then we will always use it. We're not trying to wipe it off the face of the map or anything. So I thought I'd go over a little bit of HIV statistics and how it is, in Wakefield and in the UK, and how that interacts, globally. So there are thought to be around 106,000 people living with HIV in the UK. Roughly around 5% of that figure are thought to be unaware or undiagnosed. They come about this figure from general diagnosing patterns, and then also from random anonymous blood screenings of samples that are taken when people have blood tests. In England, about 90,000 people attended care in 2021. So that's gone up a little bit from 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020 as to why people might not have been attending care. Then we have, like I said, about 90,000 in care in England. That means they're probably, engaged with support services. We have about approximately 300 in care in Wakefield. Now, it's a little tricky that we to know exactly, because what we find is that people will go to different clinics outside their area. So there might be more than 300 people actually living in Wakefield who are living with HIV, but they might access their care in, clinics in surrounding cities. Of those diagnosed, we have about 68,000 are male, about 30,000 roughly are female, and then a few there that identified as neither male or female or declined to answer. So in general, we'd say in the UK, it's about a 1/3 to 2/3 split between male and female. And globally, that's a little bit different. Globally, it affects more women than men, with just over 50%, maybe sort of in the low 52% women, and 48% men around that worldwide. In the Wakefield area, it's roughly about 50-50 between male and female of who it affects. So statistically, we have around, I've put that's 94, it should say 95%, about 95% of people who are living with HIV in the UK have been tested and diagnosed. Out of that 95% on treatment, there's 98%. So of those on treatment who are undetectable, I will go into a little bit more later on, but meaning that their virus is suppressed in their body, and they're medically well when they're undetectable. Is 98%. So from these statistics, the vast majority of people living with HIV in the UK are on treatment and undetectable. New diagnosis, so people who were diagnosed in the 2021, it fell slightly to 2,955 people, but it's actually ever so slightly risen in England as opposed to the whole of UK in 2021 by 1% of these new diagnoses. So to put that into context a little bit, when we said so about 5% of the UK figure are thought to be unaware of their diagnosis. If we look back to about 2015, there was about 15,000 people, or I think it was maybe 18,000 people who were thought to be unaware or undiagnosed. So over the years, regular testing and the work that services and the NHS has put in has really worked to lessen these new diagnoses, lessen HIV infections. And one of the main reasons for that is one, testing, and then just access to treatment for everyone. Look, but unfortunately, some things that, even though these new diagnoses are falling, the late diagnoses are rising each year. So 46% of that 2,900 were diagnosed late, meaning that they would be often sick, often hospitalized, found when they're quite unwell, quite ill. And that has risen ever so slightly since 2020 at 46%. if somebody's diagnosed late, they are more likely to suffer long-term issues because of their HIV, because the HIV has had time to damage their body. So this is why regular testing is really important, that HIV diagnoses can be found early so they don't have a chance to damage somebody's immune system. Look at little breakdowns here between ethnicity and age. You can see the vast majority of people in the UK living with HIV are white, and then we've got about 28% who are identified as Black African. It makes sense, you know, that we have more white people in the UK living with it, as that is the majority of our population. But the population of Britain who are Black African, I think it makes up about 2%. So you can see that it does disproportionately affect that community more in the UK. When you've got your ages, a vast majority are between 35 and 64. Just like the rest of the population, people now are aging with HIV. In general, people are not dying from HIV, they're not dying young. And so we're aging just like everybody else, which can add in all sorts of different complications along the line of how we age with HIV, because this is sort of new. You know, historically, if someone was given a HIV diagnosis, they were also given roughly 2 years to live. But that's not the case anymore because of the medication. People living with HIV live long, healthy lives with medication. Mode of transmission, meaning how somebody got their HIV. You can see there the largest chunk of the pie by a mile is through sexual contact. What they've split up here between sex between men and what they're defining as heterosexual contact there as well. Other ways people can contract it are on there, but you can see there's such low percentages and low numbers that the main way is through sex. So it is the main way that most people, you know, think about HIV and how it's been transmitted. Does anybody have any questions about HIV or how it's transmitted or anything before I move on? Or the statistics? No? Okay, let's move on. So I've talked about this mode of transmission. So let's go into a little bit more detail there. Oh, I can see a lovely question popped up. Oh, that's okay. No, thank you, Bill. So how does somebody contract HIV? And I thought I'd identify these three main routes and just go into a little bit more detail and hopefully be able to bust some myths here. We have a vertical transmission from mother to baby through breastfeeding or the birth canal, because HIV is not transmitted through the sperm or the eggs. So if a mum is HIV positive and they are stable on their medication, meaning their virus is suppressed in their body, they won't transmit HIV to their baby. Even if somebody is HIV positive and not on medication, which you often don't find in this country, there is still only about a 30% chance of transmitting to the baby. So it's not always a guarantee if somebody's living with HIV that they'll have a HIV positive baby. And with medication, it's reduced to almost zero. Breastfeeding still carries a small risk of transmission, and the official NHS advice is to formula feed. But mums will be supported if they want to choose to breastfeed, because although there is some risk, it is a very, very low risk. So people can be supported through that, and if they're stable on medication and everything. We have blood-to-blood transmission, and I'm singling out here through blood transfusions or through needle sharing. And the reason I'm singling that out, because once HIV is exposed to the air, it dies, and it dies really quite quickly. HIV likes to be in that body environment, and it needs to be in a body to survive. Now, when you're talking about a blood transfusion, obviously that blood is in a vacuum, it's in a sterile, sealed environment, so that will survive there. But those are the only contexts it can survive outside the body. inside a needle chamber. Again, we're talking maybe a minute or two on the point of a needle, a few seconds. And I think when it comes to blood, this is where most of the myths come from HIV, the fear of being bled on and the risk of maybe getting it. Something that I always like to highlight is that, you know, even if people had 2 open wounds and like smush them together, you bleed out, you don't bleed in. So it would be an extremely hard way to contract HIV through blood to blood, unless it was in those unique circumstances. And then we have sexual transmission. Oral sex, although we can never say there is no risk, because potentially there might be a risk, but it is so incredibly low. Like I've said, for HIV transmission, we have to think about, you need quantity of the virus and quality of the virus. You know, if someone was to have sexual fluids in their mouth and swallow it, the stomach acid would just kill any virus that's in there. And that's one of the reasons why with breastfeeding, there is still a tiny risk, and it's because the baby's immune system, although the virus might be in the breast milk, the baby's immune system hasn't fully developed yet. That might be able to fight it off. But for an adult, it would just completely die in the stomach acid. A question I'm often asked here, which is why I'm going to bring it up, and it's a little bit graphic, so forgive me. But people are asking if somebody had an ulcer or an open cut or bleeding gums in their mouth, would it be a risk? And again, I'd say extremely low risk, because your mouth is very good at creating a seal over sores and cuts. So there would have to be an open wound in the mouth, which had been opened within the last hour or is actively bleeding. And people would have to have those fluids or blood in their mouth of someone who was positive for a long time for it to be a transmission risk. And there's never been a recorded HIV transmission through oral sex alone. I have gone into quite a bit detail there. I've left the undetectable there on the screen for you to read, because I'm going to talk about that later on. Because most of these it don't matter when someone is undetectable. They cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partners. If they are on medication, their virus is suppressed, and we call that being undetectable. Does anyone have any questions or comments from this page about how somebody might contract HIV? No? Okay. Thank you. I can always come back to any at the end as well if people are interested or something comes up that you remember. So I've said it a lot. I've talked about undetectable. I've talked about this medication, and this is it. This is the medication that people go on. It's called ART, antiretroviral therapy. Some people call it ARVs, ART. It's all pretty much the same thing. It's a combination of 3 different drugs, most often found in one pill, like the one on the screen there. But some people might have those 3 drugs in a combination of 2 pills or 3 separate pills. There are roughly around 30 different types of medication that people can go on. So if somebody is allergic or resistant to one type of medication, there are always other ones that they can try. This medication is to be taken once a day, and at the moment that's once a day for the foreseeable future, for forever, because the HIV treatment is very good, but it's not a cure. It prevents the virus from replicating in the body, but if someone were to stop taking their treatment, eventually that virus would start replicating again, and then it would start attacking the immune system again. How long that would take, could be anything between weeks and months, depending on the person. But if somebody, say, missed 1 pill or even 2 pills, it wouldn't really affect their undetectable status at all. It can take quite a while, just like medication usually all types of medication takes time to build up in the body. it takes time to be got rid of as well. So one missing the occasional pill will not affect somebody's undetectability. Recently, in April this year, there has been approved to have long-lasting injectable medication to be administered once a month or every other month. Now, that's just depending on the person as to which one they would be offered. But it just shows the advancements in HIV. We've gone from HIV having zero treatment to treatment that is very damaging with lots of complicated side effects, to treatment that is now one pill a day and almost no side effects for most people. I take this medication myself and I have absolutely no side effects from it, and I never have. And that is the story of most people with HIV on this medication. So just to demonstrate a little bit more about this U equals U, this statement was released by BEVA, which is the British HIV Association, in 2017. And it was at the same time the NHS England were allowed to tell their HIV positive patients about this. But the research has been going on since about before 2008 was when it was first presented. If you're interested in the research behind what makes this U equals U statement true, the two main studies are called the Partner Study 1 and the Partner Study 2. And there's just a little visual representation of what it might look like under a microscope once you have that medication in your body. Yeah, so U equals U is really one of the biggest game changers we had in the HIV advancements, knowing that you cannot transmit HIV through sex, which obviously I've shown previously is the main way people contract HIV, is a real weight off people's minds, and it has changed a lot. It's changed people's lives, definitely. Does anyone have any questions about, like I've said, mode of transmission or U equals U as we've gone on? Because I'm going to move into the next part here and talk a bit about the support that we give and why we give the support in the first place. Okay. So I thought it was really important in this session to talk about HIV stigma and discrimination, because although it is a really happy story when it comes to the medical advances of HIV, the same unfortunately can't be said for the HIV stigma that is still around. Those of you who were old enough to or alive in the 80s and can remember the 80s might remember this is the picture that was painted about HIV. The main way people accessed their information about HIV was through the media and through newspapers and what was on the news. And you can see the sort of line that the newspapers were taking. They were very much blaming it on gay men and as the homosexual lifestyle, as Margaret Thatcher would be saying. We've got their gay virus, plague, Britain threatened, gays conspired to infect society. So the media painting the picture that HIV positive people want to infect others and go out there and essentially kill people is what they're saying, because at the time that's what it was doing. Here we had a photographer who was one of the first people to really humanize the virus and show that it wasn't just this thing, it was actually a virus that was killing people, and it was killing healthy people very, very quickly. The gentleman in this picture who's seen dying there is with his family. He was lucky enough that his family didn't reject him, because a lot of people's families did not stand by them after a HIV diagnosis. And it just really brings into light what a wasting illness it can be. The person in the bed there, you can see, was a similar size to the rest of his family before contracting HIV, and it just completely wasted him away. You may have seen, again, the same photographer, you may have seen these things like the skin lesions. This is a type of cancer called Kopp's sarcoma, which was quite common on people when HIV was, before we had medication for it. And it was one of the first indicators way back in the late 70s, early 80s, that something here was new and wrong, because this type of cancer used to only show up in quite advanced elderly men, and it was showing up in young healthy men, and it was a real visible way. People could see that someone was living with HIV as well, which brought on its own problems of discrimination that might have come with it. And then we have the famous advert, which is still labelled as one of the best public health campaigns ever to happen. It was certainly the largest. This advert went out on every TV, and flyers were given to every household in the UK. And it kind of worked in a way, you know, it really did incite fear in a lot of people about HIV and AIDS, and it did get the message out of how to protect, but it also spread, there was mass homophobia, and homophobic crimes rose quite a lot. And we're still kind of dealing with the headache, or the hangover, we say, from this advert. We still deal with it all the time, the shame and the stigma that comes. That don't die of ignorance, implying that if you have HIV, you are ignorant, and you know, haven't taken care of yourself, you know, really putting the onus is on the person who's got it. And unfortunately, it's not really gone away. You know, you can see this article here, and it's from 2017, which is a little while ago. But the headline there, woman jailed for HIV spit. If you read down there, even in that very first bit of the article, she was actually jailed for a number of suspended prison sentences. And throughout the article, I've not got it all on there, but, you know, this person had caused damage to property, public property, police property, had tried to assault different officers and all sorts of things. But that's the headline that they chose to go with. And even further down the article, in the tiny small print, it does say HIV cannot be transmitted through saliva. So even though they knew that, they still went with that headline to perpetuate this fear around HIV positive people, that they're crazy, that they're out to get other people, very much like this one here. And then we have things about PrEP, the drug that can be taken to stop somebody from contracting HIV. We've got here that lifestyle drug to be given out as vital cataract surgery is rationed. Like that's how it works, like there's two pots of money and they just decide where it will go. But that what a skewed sense of values, you know, HIV, as we know, is damaging and it kills people, but they're choosing to see it as a lifestyle drug rather than a preventative tool to stop people dying. And we do get the odd good story coming through. You know, we have people like Gareth Thomas, who was a well-loved rugby star, coming out as HIV positive, and has brought a lot of awareness with him, you know, being so open and public about it. But unfortunately, it wasn't his choice to do that. He was being blackmailed by an ex-partner. The Sun newspaper had got hold of this information and were going to release their own headlines about it, and nothing any lawyers or anything could stop it, because they decided it was within the public interest that people would know this. And the Sun newspaper also went over to Gareth Thomas's house and told his parents, which he hadn't told them about his HIV yet either. So there is a real invasion of privacy when it comes to somebody's HIV status. A lot of people do seem to feel that it's okay to share and talk about it, when obviously it's not. It is someone's personal, confidential medical information, which nobody should be sharing without express consent from the person living with it. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview there of the stigma that, you know, it looks historic, but it is still happening, and it is happening all the time. It can really affect people's mental health. Now, this is just some statements from our service users when we ask them about how stigma impacts their mental health. Feelings of shame, isolation, having poor mental health before becoming HIV positive leads to worse mental health, feelings of rejection, poor decision making, and just feeling physically weak. Because as we know, you know, mental health issues really do have physical symptoms, as you know, as they get worse. And you know, being HIV positive can make you question your whole identity of who you are as a person. And then this little stigma cycle, which just goes round and round, and it can be applied to other things, but HIV really is quite unique in carrying its own little set of stigmas. And this discrimination, again, unfortunately, is not historical. It is current, and it is now. I've worked in this field for 5 years. And in those 5 years, I've had clients and peers that I've worked with had all of these things happen to them, most of which are, or all of which are illegal. But when somebody is ashamed of themselves, when somebody has low self-worth and low self-confidence because of their HIV status, they often don't feel in a position that they can challenge this. You know, we're all aware that, you know, a manager telling somebody else about someone's HIV status is wrong. It's illegal. That's sharing someone's confidential medical information, but it happens. I know people that have been both sexually and physically assaulted when they've shared their HIV status. People have been refused job applications, university applications, chiropody, dental work, tattoos, piercings, beauty treatments. You know, there's a lot of rejection that can come with being HIV positive. The last one on the bottom there, you know, was really damaging. I spoke to this person a few years after this incident that had happened, and although what happened in the police station when they got there was that they contacted the hospital, they found out that person's undetectable status, and then they could go home. But that still happened on their doorstep, and that still happened in front of all of their neighbours. And you know, word gets around, and then this person was completely fearful of ever talking about their HIV after that. And just because of, like we said, all of those different things. And that's why we as a service exist, and why we have to exist and have to continue to exist. HIV might be quite easily treated medically now, but people are still dying from it because it's the stigma that kills. It's the stigma that kills people. Some personal observations here. So I've mentioned that, you know, I'm living with HIV, and I was diagnosed in 2015, and my journey of acceptance, you know, it did take quite a while. What I consider quite a while. It was probably about 2 years between my diagnosis and then accepting that this HIV status, and then be able to support and help other people with it. I have campaigned out there on the streets. I can see what it was like, you know, and people's reactions to it, giving out ribbons, for example, on World AIDS Day, and people will take a ribbon or they'll give a donation, but they won't wear it. And I once asked somebody, you know, he gave a donation to us, and I said, would you like a ribbon? He said no. And I said, well, you know, why not? Just as an observation, why wouldn't you take a ribbon? He was like, well, I'm not going to wear that because people will think I've got it then. And obviously this is just a charity ribbon, but the stigma is so high around HIV, just merely being associated with it is enough to put people off. On the picture on the right there was at Leeds Pride, and I was walking around with a group of people from our service, and people were openly mocking and laughing about that sign, about somebody being openly HIV positive. Now, it wasn't everyone, it was a good mixture, actually. There was some really positive cheers and you know, waves and things about our service, but at the same time, the opposite side of it, there were people were laughing, people were mocking, people were disgusted, people pulled faces like, ugh, you know, because that stigma is still there and it's still ingrained into a lot of communities. And this is why I share my story and why I tell my story publicly, because I recognize that I'm in a position that I can share it, and I'm not going to be ostracized by my community. I'm not going to be rejected. I am supported by my family and friends. So I share my story. So maybe it can help somebody out there who is not in a position to be able to share their story or share their status with anyone, and hopefully that will offer them some comfort and support. So what we do here at BHA Wakefield, we offer one-to-one practical emotion and support sessions with a support worker. We have support groups. We have mainly like social groups, health and wellbeing groups. We have specialist counselling with a counsellor who's trained to work with people who are experiencing any issues around their HIV status. We offer peer mentoring with people like me who are happy and confident in living with HIV, paired up to support other people living with HIV, you know, who might not be quite there on their journey yet. We offer rapid HIV testing. We go out into the communities and you can book online for rapid HIV testing. And we offer HIV and STI prevention sessions. Similar to this one, we can do them online or in person, and we'll talk to either staff who will be delivering care, or we can talk directly to service users about HIV and STI prevention. We have a range of different trainings for staff as well, you know, HIV knowledge and awareness. And then tomorrow we've got about PrEP, PEP and HIV testing. Both of these that I've done today and tomorrow are just kind of a whistle-stop tour. The knowledge and awareness training is longer, and we go into a lot more detail into a lot of the different issues that I've spoken about today. So that's what we do, but what can you do? What can you do as services out there? Just put a few different ideas about HIV in general. Normalizing you equals you. Tell people about it. Normalize testing. Have a test and see, you know, see what it's like. Share your story. Share your ideas. Talking about personal sexual health in general is always good, and challenging misinformation. And I put AIDS jokes specifically because, I mean, you don't hear it as much. When I was a kid, they were around all the time. I remember in the playground, and you don't hear them as much, but they are still there, and people still do say misinformation and make people living with HIV the butt of a joke. We want to support opt-out testing in A&E and emergency services. We've found that blanket testing, it does work. For example, every pregnant mum is screened for HIV as part of their blood tests, you know, when they first come into care. And it's amazing because there are, you know, barely any HIV positive children born because of that in the UK. And if we were able to test everyone, it'd be brilliant. But recently, in the past 6 months, London have had this, you know, opt-out testing in all of their A&E and emergency services, and they found hundreds and hundreds of people living with HIV and hepatitis C who otherwise wouldn't have known about it. You know, so it really does work. And if anybody knows people in hospital trusts or anything that can try and support this across Wakefield, you know, it would be really, really good to do. So I thought I'd do a little bit of myth busting here. really common questions that I get asked about HIV, or that rumours I have heard over time. So firstly here, HIV positive people must have been promiscuous. Hopefully we all know that there are different HIV transmission routes. It doesn't really matter how somebody got HIV, because it does only take one time. You don't have to have been promiscuous to have got it. I can get HIV if someone spits at me. You can't get it from spitting. Even if somebody is not on medication and has a high viral load, it cannot be transmitted that way, because there is not enough virus in the saliva for it to be transmitted to somebody. If you think about, we say that quantity and quality again. If I get a needle stick injury, I will get HIV. The risk of contracting HIV from a needle stick injury is around 0.23%. If I get HIV, I'll get AIDS. If left untreated, HIV can be very damaging, but treatment is free and quite easy to manage and extremely effective. For most people, it's 1 pill a day. The baby will be positive if the mum is. Again, like I've said earlier, vertical transmissions is less than 0.1%, and without treatment, I think that's, sorry, without treatment, that should say, not transmission, there's about a 35% chance. Easily transmitted through oral sex, like I said earlier, the transmission risk is extremely low and the conditions would have to be perfect. You can get HIV from a mosquito bite. I mean, what do we think on this? I don't think I've really covered this in the training so far. Give me a thumbs up if you think so, or a thumbs down if you don't. Or can you do a thumbs down? Just give me a thumbs up if you think it can be transmitted through that. No. Oh, lovely. So yeah, H stands for human. Thank you, Fran. H stands for human. So only humans can carry this virus. And it would die if somebody, an insect did bite somebody and then bite somebody else. So there would be no risk of HIV transmission. You can get HIV from shared razor with blood on it. Hopefully I've covered that, in that there's not enough blood on a razor, and obviously with it being exposed to the air, it will die. So there's no risk of transmission. And you hear this one that pops up in the news sometimes. You can get HIV from contaminated food or water. Now, I'm not really sure why this comes up, you know, but I hear it in a news story every now and again. It's completely false claim. Like we said, HIV dies quickly when exposed to air and light and different temperatures. It can't survive really outside the body. So it would not survive in a food processing environment either. So hopefully that has busted some myths that you might have. Oh, my page isn't moving on. Here we go. And that's it for today. Like I said, it was a little whistle-stop tour of HIV knowledge and awareness. I do have a short feedback form. I'll put the link in the chat as well. No, that's the wrong link. I'll just have to get that in a second. I will put it into the chat. We do have another session tomorrow on testing, PrEP and PEP, which are all about HIV prevention. In the meantime, you can contact me on that email address and that phone number if you want to contact me. Thank you for coming today, and I really do appreciate you being here. I'm going to stop share and stop the recording.